My name is Reed Hallberg, and I was the Chief Operating Officer of Marrowbay Freight, a legacy family shipping company owned by my wife's family. From the moment I stepped into that downtown headquarters every morning, I carried with me a deep sense of pride and ownership, pride in the company's century-long reputation for reliability, and ownership in the knowledge that my contributions had modernized its entire operations. I had restructured routes, renegotiated vendor contracts, and implemented digital cargo tracking that reduced delays by nearly 40%. I thought those achievements would insulate me from boardroom politics, but I had underestimated the ambitions of Bennett Cross, my wife's younger brother, whose glinting eyes and smooth diplomacy masked a ruthlessness I was about to witness firsthand. On the morning of my dismissal, I was called into my own office. The door clicked, and there he stood, Bennett, in a perfectly tailored suit that practically glowed with new CEO optimism. His grin was too wide, his posture too casual as he leaned against the edge of my mahogany desk. He didn't even sit. "Reed," he began, voice warm as if he were about to invite me to lunch. "Instead," he announced, "you're not qualified to stay." His words landed like a punch in the gut. Before I could form a defense, he added, "You have a community college degree and old-school methods. That won't cut it here." He arched an eyebrow and waited. The irony was bitter. He had only recently graduated with his MBA, yet his knowledge of the docks ran shallow. I didn't argue. I gathered my pens, notebook, and photo of Marta and me at our wedding. I packed them in my leather briefcase as he rattled off talking points about new direction and strategic realignment. Every mocking phrase cost me a silent fury, but I maintained my composure. Because beneath Bennett's facade of condescension, he didn't know something critical. 5 years ago, when our board refused my proposal to acquire the land beneath Dockyards 7 and 8, I had done it myself, quietly and legally, under a holding company no one connected to Marrowbay. The lifeline of his entire fleet was mine. He thought he had fired Reed Hallberg. He had only triggered the opening move of a game he didn't realize was already lost. My office had grown still as I zipped the briefcase and placed it over my shoulder. Bennett's underlings peeked in, eyes flicking between his triumphant posture and my silent exit. The corridors buzzed with curiosity. Word would spread by lunchtime. But I didn't care about gossip. As I walked down the steps of headquarters, the morning sun slanting across the parking lot, I felt a strange calm. The sting of betrayal gave way to the thrill of potential. I wasn't a victim. I was a strategist with the strongest piece on the board. Ownership of the ground beneath them. By the time I reached my car, a sleek black sedan waiting for me, my phone buzzed with messages from friends and colleagues. Expressions of shocked sympathy. Marta's name flashed on my screen, but I didn't answer. I needed space to think, free from reassurance or regret. The drive home was a blur, stoplights, honking horns, distant chatter of delivery trucks. I inhaled slowly, coaching myself not to spiral into anger. Instead, I focused on the fact that nothing I built in 12 years could be erased with a single board vote. I had built more than a company. I had built leverage. At my house, I set the briefcase on the kitchen island and brewed black coffee. The aroma filled the room, sharp and grounding. Marta stirred in the living room, remote in hand, eyes fixed on the muted television. She didn't look at me. Her silence spoke volumes, loyalty torn between husband and brother. I sat opposite her, coffee mug steaming in my hand, waiting for her to speak. When she finally did, her voice was measured. "I'm sorry, Reed." That was it. No anger, no defense, just sorrow. I nodded, not needing an apology for what Bennett had done. I needed a partner for what I was about to do next. I told Marta nothing about my secret ownership of Dockyards 7 and 8. Not yet. I didn't want to taint her empathy with my plans. Instead, I let the silence sit between us, heavy but honest. Outside, dawn broke fully, and the sky turned a pale blue. I realized that while Bennett had seized my title, he had also given me the gift of clarity. I no longer had to fight under his rules. I could fight my own war on my own terms. Over the next hour, I drafted an email template to my lawyer, outlining steps to secure my holding company's assets. I pinned bullet points, verify title transfers, prepare for lease renegotiations, draft non-disclosure agreements. Every line fueled the fire in my chest. I wasn't angry. I was ready. Bennett had believed his victory was complete the moment he cleared my desk. But victories built on arrogance are fleeting. I sipped the last of my coffee and opened a blank document. Phase 1. Leverage Acquisition Strategy. As I typed, the outline took shape, exactly the sort of old-school planning Bennett had mocked, but tempered now with the modern touch of absolute control over the most valuable real estate in the harbor. I paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard, and let the enormity of my advantage sink in. Marrowbay's heartbeat ran through Dockyards 7 and 8. Without them, the operation sputtered. I had 90 days before the existing lease expired. 90 days to renegotiate terms that would leave Bennett scrambling. 90 days to strengthen alliances and set the clock ticking on his new regime. 90 days to ensure that when I reclaimed my position, it would be on my terms, not his. My lips curved into a small, knowing smile. In chess, sacrificing a piece to gain positional advantage is common. Today, I had sacrificed my title, but I had secured checkmate in the making, and Bennett would never see it coming. The morning after I got fired, the sky over my neighborhood was the same unremarkable gray it always was, but it felt like an accusation. I sat on the porch with black coffee in my hand and a mind that wouldn't settle. Steam curled from the mug, carrying the bitter aroma that used to taste like a promise of productivity. Now it tasted like chalk. Behind me, the front door clicked as Marta left for work. She paused on the top step, silhouetted by the hallway light, and turned without a word. Her eyes were distant. No anger, just sorrow. I nodded, a silent acknowledgement that neither of us was going to break the tension. She closed the door gently, and I heard the lock click into place. The coffee cooled too quickly in my hand, and my thoughts roamed like restless cargo in need of a destination. I replayed Bennett's words over and over in my head. You're not qualified. His tone had been so polite, so rehearsed, as if firing me were a courtesy. I wondered whether he even knew the weight of what he'd done, how easily he'd demolished a dozen years of grinding effort. The truth, though, was that I'd foreseen the possibility and had taken my insurance policy out years ago, quietly acquiring the land under Dockyards 7 and 8. My lips curved in a faint, bitter smile. The lifeline of Marrowbay's fleet belonged to me now. That was when Walter arrived. His car pulled up with a low rumble, and I saw him step onto the cracked driveway carrying a paper bag and a briefcase. My father-in-law's broad shoulders and worn suit made him look too much like a man who belonged in some quieter era. He waved as he climbed the steps and said, "Morning, Reed," his voice heavy with unspoken regret. I nodded, gesturing to a wicker chair beside mine. He didn't sit. Instead, he placed the paper bag on the wooden railing. Inside, I could smell the sweet tang of cinnamon and sugar. Cinnamon bread, his go-to olive branch. I didn't vote for it, he said, shifting from one foot to the other as if he were balancing guilt on every step. His eyes avoided mine, but I didn't stop it either. He reached into the bag and offered me a slice wrapped in wax paper. I stared at the bread, soft, promising, warm, and then at him. I wanted to shatter the moment with anger, but realized that anger was an admission that he mattered. I took the slice, tore off the paper, and inhaled deeply. The smell was comforting, but comfort felt like a betrayal. I told Marta to stay out of it, he said, watching me tear into the bread. Family business goes ugly fast. I was hoping. He cleared his throat and folded his hands. I was hoping you'd stick around. I chewed slowly, letting the sugar coat my tongue. My mind raced through scenarios. Reconciliation, retaliation, renaissance. I swallowed and said, "You didn't stick around either when it mattered." My tone was calm, but each word landed like a carefully aimed bullet. Walter's shoulders slumped, as if he'd been expecting that. He shifted the briefcase in his hand and nodded. "You've always got that look before you spring a trap," he said, half joking but with a tremor. "What did you do, Reed?" I leaned back and laid the cinnamon bread on the table. "What I should have done years ago," I said. "I bought Dockyards 7 and 8 5 years ago, quietly, legally, under my holding company. No one knew. Not the board, not Marta, not even you." Walter blinked, and for a moment his age showed in the widened eyes and slack jaw. 60 days, I said. "That's all the existing lease is left. After that, the land reverts to the title holder, and that's me." I watched him blink again as the realization hit. Once the lease expires, no legacy rates. No sweetheart deals. We renegotiate or it goes to auction. I saw the panic in his gaze, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm not angry, Walter. I'm ready." He ran a hand through his thinning hair and let out a long breath. "Renegotiate how?" he asked. I picked up the bread again, tore off a chunk, and chewed. I used the numbness in my mouth to mask the surge of satisfaction. "At market rates," I said. "Or we look for a buyer who will pay more." Maybe Everline Maritime. They've been sniffing around these docks for months. They'd love to expand. I paused, gauging his reaction. Or, I added, we could work together. You vouch for me, and I'll ensure the transition is seamless. Crews stay on, operations keep running, everyone wins except Bennett. Walter exhaled and ran his hand over the briefcase handle. The paper bag underneath shifted its weight, crumbs rattling. He closed his eyes and let out a shuddering sigh. You always play 5 moves ahead, he said. I should have seen this coming. I placed my mug on the table and stood. The porch felt too small, too familiar. I needed space to plot my next steps. I'll need your help, I said. Make some calls on my behalf. Keep this between us until I'm ready to announce. I reached out my hand. He hesitated, looking at the bread, then at my hand. Finally, he grasped it, and his grip was firm. Anything, he said. Whatever you need. As he left, briefcase in hand, I watched his car disappear down the street. The cinnamon scent lingered, sweet against the crisp morning air. I took a final bite and tossed the crumb-laden paper into the yard. I closed my eyes and let the quiet settle. The boardroom had humiliated me. Bennett had underestimated me. But now, armed with the most valuable real estate in Marrowbay's empire, I held the real power. Fowler's law of economies said ownership trumped authority. I set my jaw and walked inside, ready to begin phase 2. 3 days after Bennett Cross had delivered my pink slip, the world tried to drag me back into Marrowbay Freight's orbit, but I refused to oblige. My inbox pinged relentlessly, each notification sparking a flicker of irritation. That morning, I sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me, laptop open to a sea of unread messages. The first, from Bennett himself, arrived at precisely 8:02 a.m. Read, please forward all your operational notes to ensure continuity. His tone feigned concern, but beneath that veneer lay entitlement. He expected me to do half the work of 12 years of corporate evolution for free. I leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms, and wondered whether he realized I hadn't typed a single line of code for his continuity, nor had I once considered handing over my life's work as a courtesy. Before I could craft a reply, though I never intended to, I felt the vibration of my phone. A lawyer email. Time-sensitive access request from Marrowbay Freight. I opened it. The company's counsel demanded immediate access to operational binders, presentations, spreadsheets, everything. They cited company property and duty to cooperate. Their words carried legal weight. Their arrogance stung more than Bennett's mockery. I closed the email and stared at the screen. The binders in question were not company property. Each red leather-bound volume was filled with my handwriting, my analysis, my solutions to every logistical bottleneck this company had ever faced. I had drafted them at home, late nights and weekends, with my own pen. The data and insights were mine until proven otherwise. I thumbed through the lawyer's message again, savoring the phrase time-sensitive. Time was precisely the leverage I intended to use. I opened a new email to my own attorney. Subject line, Marrowbay Freight, demand letters and leases. In succinct bullet points, I outlined the demand for my binders, requested a review of our holding company's exclusive title to Dockyards 7 and 8, and asked for counsel on refusing or negotiating the operational data request. Within 20 minutes, my lawyer replied, let them sue if they're desperate. There's no company claim on your personal property. I'll draft a refusal and prepare for litigation. I couldn't suppress a grin. My lawyer's confidence fueled mine. By midday, the emails had multiplied. 2 from Bennett's assistant, 1 from HR pleading for exit interviews, and another from the finance department, requesting my signature on pending vendor payments. Each missive was like a tiny poke, a reminder that Bennett assumed I remained subordinate. I deleted the finance email without opening it. Payments processed or not, I'd arranged automatic transfers long before my termination. I replied to the HR message with a simple, no exit interview needed. Best of luck. Then I saw the subject line that made my chest tighten. Urgent. Doc 7 and 8 insurance liability. I clicked it. The insurance broker at Tygate Underwriters wanted confirmation of leaseholder status and coverage details. My heart pounded, not out of fear, but excitement. They believed the docks were leased property, insured at legacy rates. But legally, the policies belonged to the leaseholder, me. I drafted a brief directive. Please update records. Title holder is Hallberg Maritime Holdings. Send me the policy documents. I pressed send and felt the balance of power shift. That afternoon, as the office lights of Marrowbay flickered on deep downtown, I drove to my private storage unit. Inside, rows of shelving held my red binders, 12 spines labeled from Operations 2012 through Innovations 2024. Each embossed title represented strategies, crisis responses, and cost-saving solutions that had propelled the company forward. I pulled 3 binders: operations, vendor contracts, maintenance logs, and carried them to a small conference room at a co-working space. Comfortably furnished, the room's high windows offered a cityscape view. I arranged the binders on the table, opened the operations volume, and thumbed to the emergency diversion protocols I'd written during the hurricane season of 19. The protocols had saved the company over $2 million in rerouting costs and vessel damages. I knew Bennett needed that information to avoid halting ports, so I'd sell it back at a premium. I dialed my lawyer, pacing the length of the room. "They want my binders," I said, voice low. "I'm not giving them away for free. Draft a licensing agreement. Charge per page." He chuckled. "Already working on it. We'll send a counter-proposal, standard rate plus confidentiality fee. They'll either pay or sue." I exhaled, adrenaline coursing through me. In corporate chess, you sacrifice pawns to protect your queen. Bennett thought he'd sacrificed me. Instead, he'd sacrificed his own bottom line. Back home, Marta glanced at the binders as she passed through the foyer. Her expression softened, curiosity edging out her hurt. "What's all this?" she asked gently. I closed the door behind her and said, "My notes. My strategy. Morro Bay wants them, but I'm not handing over my intellect for nothing." She nodded slowly, pride flickering in her eyes. "They'll pay," she said. I smiled, feeling the weight of isolation lift. I was no longer fighting a family war. I was negotiating a business transaction from strength. That evening, my phone pinged again. "Bennett's assistant. Please advise on delivery details for operational binders." I replied with a link to a secure portal and an invoice, $1,200 per binder, daily rate plus administrative surcharge. I added a note: "Payment due within 24 hours, access granted upon settlement." Then I shut my laptop and stood, stretching my shoulders, tasting victory. Bennett had asked me to ensure continuity. I would, at a price. He would learn that talent cannot be commandeered, and loyalty is neither cheap nor transferable. As darkness settled outside, I poured a new cup of coffee, darker than before, and raised it in a silent toast to the ask that never ends, and to the price people pay when they try to take what isn't theirs. That afternoon, I slipped into my old site supervisor Carla's direct line, but I knew better than to call. Her voicemail box was bound to be overflowing after news of my exit. Instead, I opened my phone and read her text: "New CEO just skipped dock inspections. Ship crews are angry." My stomach clenched. Dock inspections were the bedrock of safety and trust. Bennett's decision to bypass them was a rookie mistake that could cost lives and reputations. I tapped out a reply, details, then scrolled through the messages piling in. Carla's next text arrived seconds later. "Security cameras down." He said tech upgrade. "Crews think sabotage." I exhaled, picturing the chaos at Westport. Rust peppering on hulls, cargo manifest unchecked, workers' hands clammy with uncertainty. I locked my phone and walked the perimeter of my warehouse yard, and used now, but familiar. The salt tang of the harbor breeze stirred memories of my midnight inspections, clipboard in hand, flashlight beam tracing the contours of hull plates, ensuring every bolt was tight. Bennett's inexperience was leaking into operational cracks. Skipping inspections didn't modernize, it eroded trust. Without regular checks, small defects turned into disasters. When a container crane collapsed in 2017 because of a single, unchecked weld fracture, we'd rewritten our inspection protocols. I remembered pacing beside that mangled steel, promising workers I'd restore safety standards. Now, I wasn't there to enforce them. Later that evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, I sat in my study, illuminated by a single lamp. I drafted an email to Carla. Document every missed inspection. Photos, crew statements, incident logs. Send to me. Then I forwarded that note to Cal Knox, my private investigator, with instructions to cross-reference vendor repair orders and technical support tickets. Between Carla's insider insight and Cal's investigative reach, I'd paint a damning picture of Bennett's negligence, a persuasive tool for negotiations. A few hours later, my phone buzzed again. Carla's message: "Spare part orders slashed. They're running fast and thin. Mechanics are overworked." I pressed my thumb against the screen, the weight The supply chain was Morro Bay's lifeblood. Removing critical spares to save a few dollars was reckless. I imagined the whine of a turbine gearbox grinding without lubrication, or the hydraulic lines leaking under pressure because seals hadn't been replaced. Each cost-cutting measure rolled financial savings forward, but pushed safety backward. By the next morning, my inbox bore witness to growing turmoil. An email from the insurance broker read, "Field adjuster reports increased operational risk at Dock 7 and 8. Coverage may be suspended pending audit." My pulse quickened. If Tigate underwriters pulled coverage, Merrill Bay's liabilities would skyrocket. I composed a reply, confirming titleholder and policyholder status. Please withhold suspension until audit completed. Coordinate with Hallberg Maritime Holdings. That email alone would force Bennett's hand. He couldn't afford a policy cancellation or a lawsuit over an uninsured cargo spill. The afternoon brought another text from Carla. Insurance guy asked who owns Docks 7 and 8. I said I didn't know. They're checking. I clicked my pen against the table, the rhythm steady and deliberate. They were close to discovering my ownership, more leverage. Instead of panic, I felt a cold efficiency settle over me. I drafted a brief email to my lawyer. Initiate confirmation of title and forward chain of title documents to underwriters. Emphasize immediate audit completion requirement. Then I forwarded the response, confident my lawyer would act swiftly. Late that evening, I dialed Carla and left a voicemail. Read here. Keep me posted on crew morale. Document everything. And don't let anyone erase camera footage. I hesitated before adding, "You're doing the right thing." Even in voicemail, my tone was firm but supportive, an anchor for her in this storm. Then I called Cal. I need all shell companies linked to Vexera supplying the ports. Match invoices to bulk part orders. If we trace delayed shipments or faulty components to Bennett's shadow network, we'll have the proof to dismantle his arguments. He acknowledged with a clipped, understood, read. That night, I lay awake thinking about the stakes. Trouble at the terminals wasn't merely logistical, it was psychological warfare. Crews feared for their jobs and lives. Vendors feared unpaid invoices. Insurers feared catastrophic claims. Bennett had triggered a cascading crisis, and each faulty decision drew the noose tighter around his neck. Meanwhile, I sat in the control room of my own design, armed with documents, witness statements, and legal title. The balance of power was shifting back in my favor. At dawn, I returned to the docks, not as COO, but as the unseen landlord. I stood on the quay wall, watching the cranes swing like giant metal arms waking from sleep. Dock workers gathered in small clusters, whispering about inspection skips and bonus cuts. I approached a group of mechanics, offering coffee and a simple question: "What's the biggest issue right now?" They looked at each other, uncertain whether to trust the outsider, but then one spoke up. "We need parts, we need checks, or someone's going to get hurt." I nodded, absorbing every word. "I'll take care of it," I said, voice low enough for only them to hear. In that moment, I reclaimed authority not through a title, but through action. As I walked back to my car, the early sun glinted on rust spots and cracked paint on barges moored along the quay. The instability at Merrill Bay cut through the harbor like a jagged blade, but I had the tools to mend it, or to watch it sink under its own incompetence. Bennett might own the CEO chair, but I owned the ground beneath the empire, and that made all the difference. Curiosity drove me to the zoning office the morning after Carla's last text. I settled into the hard plastic seat, folded arms resting on my leather briefcase, and watched the clerk's bored expression as she typed my request. Parcel records, Dock 7 and 8 vicinity, last 6 months. While she printed the pages, I thumbed through my phone, reviewing Carla's incident logs. Camera outages, angry crews, missing parts. It was a slow-motion collapse engineered by someone who didn't understand the ecosystem he inherited. I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering Bennett's smug expression on the day he fired me. He thought he had won. Now I would prove how hollow his victory was. The clerk returned with a stack of permits and filings. I scanned the document headers: Horizon Stream, Blue Trace Logistics, Pacific Link Holdings. The names sounded innocuous, but as I flipped through, the addresses matched properties adjacent to Merrill Bay's historical shipping lanes. My pulse quickened. These shell companies weren't random investors, they were markers on a map. Points in a shadow network. I leafed to the bottom of one filing and saw an obscure notation: Vexera Development, LLC, Agent of Record. My breath caught. Vexera. A search on my phone confirmed it. A newly formed corporation with founder listed as Bennett Cross. He was building parallel cargo hubs, undermining Marrowbay's supply chain, and positioning himself to usurp the entire market once Marrowbay's failures justified his modern alternative. I left the zoning office with copies in hand and drove to a small coffee shop down the street. The neon sign buzzed above a row of delivery trucks, silent witnesses to the unfolding merger of ambition and sabotage. I ordered a black tea, lighter than coffee, but enough to sharpen my mind, and opened the first permit. Horizon Stream's filing showed a proposed warehouse expansion on the outskirts of the city, less than 2 miles from Marrowbay's central depot. Blue Trace had applied for expedited port access. PacificLink's permit sought direct rail link to the docks. I cross-referenced the dates. Each filing appeared 1 week after Bennett assumed his CEO role. His plan was rapid, aggressive, and meticulously hidden behind innocuous corporate veneers. I tapped out a message to Cal Knox, "Meet me at Everline offices in 1 hour with any connections you found between these shells and Bennett." Then I called Carla. "Scan the loading manifest for any deliveries from Horizon Stream or Blue Trace to Marrowbay Yards. I want invoice numbers, dates, and quantities. Send them encrypted." Her prompt reply on it, filled me with confidence. Carla's loyalty and my investigative network formed a potent combination. I closed my eyes and pictured the boardroom where I would one day expose Bennett's scheme, the gasps, the stunned silence, the inevitable resignation vote. Then I reminded myself that exposing him was only half the battle. I needed to negotiate from strength, controlling both Marrowbay's assets and the evidence of his betrayal. An hour later, Kel arrived at Everline's sleek lobby, his trench coat damp from a sudden drizzle. He handed me a manila envelope bulging with documents, corporate registration forms, emails between Vexera executives, and even a draft business plan outlining cargo routes mirroring Marrowbay's most profitable lanes. He traced Shell Company bank transactions through intermediary accounts to Bennett's personal credit line. The level of detail was staggering. I leaned toward him in the private meeting room, papers spread across the table like a prosecutor's exhibit. He copied everything: crew rosters, port agreements, even employee pay scales. I said softly. Kel nodded. He's trying to collapse Marrowbay's reliability reputation and then swoop in as the savior. Classic gambit. I closed the folder and exhaled. We'll call this evidence Exhibit A. Back at home that evening, I laid out the permits, invoices, and correspondence on the dining room table. Marta entered quietly, pausing at the doorway. Her eyes flicked over the documents, lingering on Vexera's logo. "Bennett," she whispered, voice tight. I nodded and showed her the timeline. First the zoning filings, then the vendor diversions, and finally the empty promises of upgraded technology to the crews. She placed her hand on mine, her touch steady like an anchor. "What will you do?" she asked. I squeezed her hand. "Exactly what I should have from the start. I'll dismantle his shadow network, piece by piece, and re-establish Marrowbay's dominance. But I need your support, and Walter's, to leverage a partnership with Everline before Bennett's next move." She nodded, determination returning to her eyes. "I'm in." The next morning, I entered Marrowbay Freight's executive lobby under the guise of negotiating a joint venture with Everline Maritime. Bennett sat behind his glass-walled office, phone to ear, exuding overconfidence. I stepped forward and tapped his door. He looked up, surprise flashing across his face. Before he could recover, I presented a single folder, the zoning filings and invoices. "Care to explain why Horizon Stream has been delivering materials to your yards?" I asked, voice calm but firm. His posture stiffened. I continued, "I have proof that Vexera Development, your own company, has been building a competing network that mirrors Marrowbay's routes. Explain this to the board." Bennett's lips pressed into a thin line. I leaned closer, whispering, "Your shadow scheme ends today." As I walked away, leaving him to face the fallout, I felt the satisfaction of someone who had uncovered a buried trap and turned it against its creator. The ground beneath the docks was mine, and now I held the map of Bennett's ambition in my hands. He had built his empire on borrowed routes and stolen secrets. I owned the very land that sustained him. In the quiet before the storm of boardroom upheaval, I allowed myself a fleeting smile. When the next chapter began, Marrowbay would emerge stronger, and Bennett would discover that shadows have no substance once they're exposed to light. I arranged to meet Rowena Vale at Everline Maritime's waterfront office on a crisp Tuesday morning. The sun glinted off the water like scattered diamonds, but the chill in the air reminded me this was business, not a scenic stroll. As I stepped through the frosted glass doors, I spotted her immediately. Tall, poised, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of authority and quiet confidence. Rowena's reputation preceded her. She had overseen Everline's expansion into 3 new ports in the last 5 years without a single operational mishap. If anyone could see the value in my proposal, it would be her. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a measured smile, her dark eyes unwavering as she led me to a conference room overlooking the bay. I placed the file on the table between us, the same legal documents, lease agreements, and zoning filings that exposed Bennett's missteps in my ownership of Dockyards 7 and 8. She flicked through the pages, brows knitting slightly as she absorbed each detail: the expired lease, the shell company filings, the evidence of crew chaos. For a moment, I feared her silence was skepticism. Then she looked up and asked, "You want us to acquire the terminals outright?" I shook my head. "Not acquire. Lease from me. You handle operations, keep the existing personnel, maintain continuity. I'll remain behind the scenes, ensuring the transition goes smoothly." I tapped the lease documents. "I own the ground. You run the operation. No drama, no learning curve for your teams. You get instant scale. I get security for my assets." Rowena leaned back, studying me as though weighing the contents of my proposal against some invisible scale. "What's your endgame, Reed?" she asked, voice soft but probing. "Is this revenge against your family? Or is there growth potential you see that Marrow Bay ignored?" I welcomed the question. I wasn't here to settle scores. I was here to build something that worked. "Results," I said. "Everline's model is lean, efficient, and innovative. Marrow Bay has talent and history but lacks the discipline and investment to compete in an era of razor-thin margins. You need these terminals to shore up your network. I need a partner who values long-term stability over short-term optics." She nodded, tapping a pen against her notebook. "There are regulatory hurdles, union considerations, insurance transfers, all of which hinge on clear ownership and management structures." I slid forward and placed my hand over the lease documents. "I've anticipated that. My legal team has drafted a comprehensive arrangement, a triple net lease with performance clauses tied to safety and throughput benchmarks. You get the benefit of my title. I get guaranteed revenue plus a seat at the advisory table. If you meet or exceed targets, we renegotiate at rates favorable to both parties." Rowena paused, eyes drifting to the water. The Everline cranes loomed in the distance, painting silhouettes against the sky. For a heartbeat, I saw her calculating every variable: the potential profits, the costs of integration, the risks of taking on a legacy terminal with thin margins. Then she set her jaw and met my gaze. "I'll need board approval, of course. But from what I see here, this is a low-risk entry with high upside. Draft the term sheet, and let's get this in front of our legal counsel." Her tone was brisk but encouraging. I allowed myself a concealed smile. We shook hands again, sealing the verbal agreement. As I left the conference room, I felt a sense of momentum I hadn't felt since before my firing. Everline's interest validated not only my claim but also my strategy. I was no longer the ousted COO. I was the linchpin in a strategic alliance that would outmaneuver Bennett's branched ambitions. Outside, the harbor's usual rhythm, horns, crane clanks, and the distant hum of engines, sounded like applause. That afternoon, I drafted the formal lease terms, incorporating performance metrics and escalation clauses to protect my interests. I sent the document to Rowena with a note of thanks and a promise to attend her board meeting next week to present in person. Marta called as I hit send, her voice bright with cautious optimism. "It's happening," she said. "I can feel it." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "Yes," I replied. "It is." Later, as dusk settled over the bay and Everline's cranes cast long shadows across the water, I stood on my own property, Dockyards 7 and 8, imagining the future. Underneath the towering gantries, the terminals would hum again with purpose and precision, freed from the turbulence Bennett had unleashed. Rowena's agreement meant more than a lease. It meant stability for the workers, security for my investment, and a platform to negotiate from strength when I next faced the board. I tapped the edge of the dock railing, the wood smooth under my fingertips, and wondered how quickly Bennett would realize he'd been outplayed. He thought firing me would end the contest. Instead, it had only begun. And now, with Everline's partnership secured, the real game was in motion, one where I held all the essential pieces. The wind carried the echo of waves against pilings and the distant call of a ship's horn, as though heralding the next phase of my plan. In that moment, I felt the calm certainty of someone who knows the board is set, the pieces in place, and victory all but assured. I started by reaching out to Jonah, my lead logistics coordinator, with a simple, low-key text. If things shift, you'll hear from someone who cares. I didn't promise him a job, just a lifeline, enough to make him pause mid-coffee and wonder what was coming. Next, I sent Sabrina, my head of maintenance, a note referencing a casual lunch catch-up. Let me know if you're free Wednesday. And Miles, the senior dock foreman, got a discreet voicemail, touching base on potential opportunities. I was planting seeds in fertile ground, where familiarity bred hope more reliably than slick recruitment pitches. Within hours, my phone buzzed. Jonah replied, "Is this about Merrow Bay?" His hesitation was palpable. I texted back, "Something better." Sabrina's response was more direct. "When and where?" And Miles called, voice tight with restrained excitement. "Talk to me." I didn't schedule interviews or draft offer letters. I simply let anticipation build. Each reply felt like a small victory, evidence that loyalty transcended titles. They remembered the environment I'd fostered, where suggestions were heard, innovations encouraged, and mistakes treated as lessons rather than liabilities. By the end of the day, Carla forwarded a group chat invitation. Old teammates, dispatchers, maintenance crew, people I trusted and who trusted me. The message read, "Reed may have something for us. Stand by." I watched the chat light up. Thumbs up emojis, questions, tentative plans to mate. It wasn't a formal recruitment drive. It was a whisper campaign of solidarity. The shift supervisors and stevedores, the crane operators and clerks, all felt the tremor of change. Their workdays under Bennett's regime had been marked by uncertainty, cut budgets, skipped inspections, and an ever-present worry that shortcuts would jeopardize livelihoods. Now they sensed a possible return to stability. Later that evening, I hosted a casual meet and greet at the same dockside cafe where I'd first uncovered Bennett's shell companies. The salty breeze mingled with the scent of grilled fish and coffee steam as Jonah, Sabrina, Miles, Carla, and a dozen others gathered around picnic tables. I circulated among them, listening more than speaking, gauging their frustrations and aspirations. Jonah recounted how vessel assignments had become erratic, with crews rerouted without notice. Sabrina described how deferred maintenance was turning routine repairs into all-night crisis fixes. Miles lamented the morale slump among seasoned dockhands who felt discarded. Each story underscored the depth of Bennett's mismanagement, and each reflection strengthened my resolve to rebuild not just an operation, but a culture. I reminded them of our shared victories, how we had weathered hurricanes, labor disputes, and shipping line bankruptcies together. I spoke quietly about the opportunity ahead. An alliance with Everline Maritime that would honor their expertise, compensate them fairly, and restore the pride that had eroded under rushed cost cuts and erratic directives. I didn't leak financials or disclose every detail. I merely offered a vision of a workplace where their voices mattered and their skills were valued. At the end, I said, "If you want in, be ready." No applause, just nods and murmurs of agreement. I wanted them committed, not coerced. In the following days, I received inquiries. When can I start? What roles are you hiring for? Is this a full-time thing? To each, I responded with concise honesty, details soon. Keep current jobs until then. I needed momentum without chaos. Meanwhile, Bennett wandered through the docks unaware that his workforce was slipping through his fingers. He assumed authority and security came with the CEO title, but he lacked the tacit trust of the crews. True authority arises when people believe in both the leader and the vision. Under Bennett, that belief had crumbled. Under me, it was stirring back to life. I coordinated with Everline's HR to prepare provisional contracts, matching or exceeding existing pay scales and including performance bonuses tied to safety metrics and throughput targets. I crafted apprenticeship programs for newer hires, ensuring skill development and career paths, initiatives Bennett had shelved to cut costs. I briefed my lawyer on incentives and non-compete clauses to safeguard trade secrets without punishing loyalty. Every element was designed to draw the best talent back while sending a clear message. The era of penny-pinching shortcuts was over. One morning, Carla texted a whispered alert. "Miles says the old gang is al fresco discussing walking off-site to meet with you. Heads up." I grinned at my phone, then forwarded a quick directive to Everline HR. Prepare welcome packets, hard hats, safety manuals, benefit summaries for immediate distribution. By afternoon, I delivered the packets in person. As I walked through the gate, a group of operators approached, helmets in hand, uncertain but hopeful. I handed out the packets, looked each in the eye, and said, "Welcome back." Their relief was tangible. They exhaled, shoulders relaxing, smiles breaking. Word spread fast. Supervisors who had once scowled at Bennett's improvised directives now approached me with questions about schedules and training. Mechanics who had worked nights to cover for cut budgets now asked about shift differentials and tool allowances. Even dockside vendors reached out, curious about new purchase orders and maintenance contracts. The ecosystem was reactivating around the promise of stability and respect. Meanwhile, Bennett's office grew quiet. Rumors circulated that turnover rates had spiked and that several key personnel had tendered resignation letters addressed to Everline, not Marrowbay. His strategic initiatives floundered without experienced staff to execute them. The board began receiving reports of declining throughput and escalating safety incidents. Each failure echoed the warnings I had issued, but he had ignored. By week's end, the transformation was undeniable. Crews were back in uniform, routes were recalibrated, maintenance schedules reinstated, and morale rebounding. The docks hummed once more with purpose rather than panic. I walked the yard at dawn, holding a clipboard not as a disgraced outsider, but as a guiding presence. Jonah flagged me down to discuss a logistics bottleneck. Sabrina ran through maintenance forecasts, and Miles showed me the refurbished safety harnesses. Their respect was not contingent on title, but earned through shared history and mutual trust. As the morning sun glinted on the water, I thought about how power truly works. It emanates from the ground up, from the people who do the work day after day. Bennett had tried to assert power from the top down, but without buy-in, authority is empty. By restoring faith in leadership and demonstrating commitment to the team, I had reclaimed the heart of Marrowbay's operations. The crew had come back, not because of contracts alone, but because they believed in a leader who valued them. And that belief would be the foundation upon which I would rebuild the empire Bennett had nearly destroyed. Monday morning arrived with a terse notification on my phone. Board meeting 10 a.m., conference room B. I straightened my tie in the oversized mirror of my apartment's entryway, recalling how just weeks ago I had walked past that same room as a defeated casualty. Today, I would enter as the agent of upheaval. I drove downtown, the city streets alive with rush-hour energy, my mind focused on the 2 folders waiting in my briefcase. Stepping into the Marrowbay freight lobby, I drew a few curious glances. The receptionist, who once knew me as COO, offered a wary smile. I returned it with cool confidence and signed in under Reed Hallberg, consultant. Bennett's office door stood open, his dark-suited figure visible behind the glass. He turned toward me, surprise flickering in his eyes. I nodded politely and took the elevator to the executive level. The conference room door was already ajar when I arrived. Around the polished oak table sat 8 board members, family elders, and industry veterans, each flanked by aides with tablets and notepads. Bennett sat at the head, visage polished but taut. Walter, my father-in-law and board chair, offered me a slight nod of acknowledgement. I set the briefcase down and placed the 2 folders side by side. "Thank you for accommodating this special session," I began, voice measured. Bennett's eyebrows rose in mild alarm. I clicked open the first folder and extracted a thick packet labeled Exhibit A, Vexra Shadow Network. I flipped to the cover letter, a succinct summary of shell company filings, vendor diversions, and duplicated route plans associated with Vexra development, all traced back to Bennett. The room shifted. Murmurs rippled as board members exchanged astonished looks. "Mr. Cross," I said, locking eyes with Bennett, "this packet documents your unauthorized creation of Horizon Stream, Blue Trace Logistics, and other shell companies designed to siphon operations away from Marrowbay. It outlines a deliberate campaign to collapse our reputation for reliability, then rebrand these assets under your new venture." Bennett's lips thinned, but he said nothing. I let the silence stretch, then continued. "Your actions violated your fiduciary duty and exposed the company to significant liability." I slid the second folder across the table and opened the top sheet, Exhibit B, Everline Lease Agreement. The board leaned forward as I laid out the terms of the triple net lease with Everline Maritime for Dockyards 7 and 8, terms that secured my assets' revenue stream and positioned Everline as the new operator. I outlined the performance clauses, the advisory seat, and the contingency plan for full takeover should benchmarks be missed. The shuffling of papers punctuated the gravity of the moment. Walter cleared his throat and addressed Bennett. "This is accurate?" Bennett glanced at the exhibits, then at me, then back at his notes. He opened his mouth, closed it, and finally muttered, but no coherent defense followed. The board members began to speak, voices low but urgent, concerns about reputational damage, legal exposure, and the accelerated decline in operational metrics. One by one, they saw the jeopardy Bennett had placed on the line. I watched Bennett's facade crumble as the board chair asked for a vote. I did not speak. I merely observed as the room raised hands. First, to remove Bennett Cross as CEO. Next, to approve my interim appointment as consultant director until a permanent replacement was found. And finally, to ratify the Everline lease. 3 separate votes, nearly unanimous. Bennett's shoulders slumped as the gavel slammed down, signaling the end of his reign. When the meeting adjourned, I gathered my briefcase and approached Walter. "Thank you," I said quietly. He nodded, eyes misted with relief and regret. "You warned us," he replied. "We should have listened." As I left the conference room, Bennett lingered in the doorway, the weight of defeat written across his face. I met his gaze and offered no pity. "I warned you." In the days that followed, Marrowbay Freight underwent a metamorphosis. The board named an interim CEO to stabilize operations as Everline's teams moved in under the lease agreement. I worked side by side with Rowena Vale's transition managers, facilitating introductions with the crews and smoothing regulatory paperwork. Media outlets covered the leadership change, praising this seamless integration and fresh strategic direction, carefully omitting the familial betrayal behind the headlines. Walking the docks at dawn, badge now reading consultant director, I felt a sense of vindication tempered by responsibility. The cranes loomed overhead, and the workers, Jonah, Sabrina, Miles, nodded as I passed. This boardroom earthquake had reset Marrowbay's foundations. Now it was up to all of us to rebuild on firmer ground. And though I no longer held the COO title, I possessed something stronger: the trust of the board, the loyalty of the crews, and the security of the land beneath our empire. The empire was back. And this time, disturbance had given way to a quieter, more resilient power structure. 12 months had passed since the dust settled on the boardroom upheaval, and the docks of Marrowbay had transformed into a fortress of steady industry. I arrived early one morning, before dawn had fully surrendered to daylight, slipping beneath the vast gantry cranes that loomed like silent sentinels. Under the watchful eye of Everline's freshly painted Port Silas Terminal signage, I navigated silent rows of stacked containers and service vehicles, greeting familiar faces as I passed. Jonah, clipboard in hand, was already coordinating vessel berths, his posture relaxed but alert. Sabrina and her maintenance crew clustered nearby around a freshly serviced cargo loader, trading jokes that echoed off the steel beams, proof that morale had not only recovered but flourished. Standing at the edge of Dock 8, I surveyed the scene. Sleek new forklifts humming along designated lanes, safety cones marking freshly painted walkways, and a line of shipping containers bearing Everline's logo stretching toward the horizon. In that moment, I felt the difference between authority earned and authority assumed. Bennett had claimed his power from a glass office across the river. I had earned mine here, amid the rumble of engines and the shouts of stevedores. I pocketed my ID badge, regional director, but wore my confidence like armor. Since sealing the lease with Everline, my role had shifted from Avenger to architect, designing a stable future for a company reborn. My first stop was the terminal office, where a whiteboard gleamed with updated performance metrics. Last month's throughput numbers had exceeded projections by 15%, and safety incidents were down 80% compared to the prior year. I circled the figures with a dry erase marker, then erased and updated with today's date, making notes in the margin. These results were more than statistics. They were lifelines for hundreds of families who depended on steady work. I sent a quick congratulatory email to the operations team. Exceptional performance. Let's keep this momentum. Even the act of typing felt different now, infused with purpose rather than obligation. Down at Dock 7, I found Miles overseeing the offloading of a container ship from Southeast Asia. A gentle rain had begun, beads of water tracing rivulets along the vessel's hull, but the crew worked with practiced efficiency. I approached under a yellow waterproof jacket and nodded toward the stacking pattern. "Rotation in 6 hours," I said. He acknowledged with a curt nod. "Shift leads all set. Everyone's on schedule." Rain drummed on my jacket as he continued. "We're ahead of the winter surge, no loading backlogs." I tipped my head in approval. "Good." Keep me posted on any discrepancies. Then I moved on, not because formalities demanded it, but because real leadership meant staying connected to the action. By mid-morning, I met with Rowena and her transition manager in the Joint Command Center. We reviewed the latest operational dashboard, vessel arrivals, cargo tonnage, container dwell times, and discussed plans to integrate renewable energy sources for terminal cranes. Everline had earmarked capital for hybrid electric conversions next quarter, and I championed accelerated testing. Rowena smiled, her respect for my insights evident. Your vision has breathed new life into this place, she said. I deflected praise. It was here all along. We just needed the right partner to invest in it. Later, I walked the perimeter of the terminal's newly rebuilt break room, where workers gathered for meals under natural light and ergonomic tables. I overheard Sabrina explaining a maintenance tip to an apprentice, her voice patient and confident. Across the room, Tyler, the young loader operator, glanced up from his lunch, offering me a thumbs up. These small gestures of camaraderie were the currency of true power, goodwill earned through consistent respect and opportunity. I reminded myself that this environment had replaced the fear and uncertainty Bennett's regime had bred. Here, people thrived because they felt valued. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, lease renewal strategy meeting 3 months out. I closed my eyes for a moment, recalling the day I first negotiated with Everline. Instead of gloating, I'd focused on common goals, operational excellence, workforce stability, and shared growth. That spirit had carried us through year one, and now we contemplated long-term extension and potential expansion into adjacent docks. I drafted bullet points for strategic imperatives: sustainability, digital integration, and employee development. As I typed, I envisioned a network of terminals bound not by ownership alone, but by shared values. In the afternoon sun, I convened an impromptu town hall meeting on the dock apron. Crews gathered around shipping pallets repurposed as benches, their rain gear replaced by company polos and safety vests. I stood on a low crate and spoke without notes. When I returned, I promised a workplace rooted in respect and collaboration. Today, we've exceeded our safety and productivity goals, and that's because each of you stepped up. Marrowbay's legacy lives on through your hard work. Heads nodded, and a murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. I continued. Now, we're exploring ways to foster innovation, apprenticeships, leadership training, and community partnerships. I want your ideas. Hands shot up. Suggestions ranged from scholarship programs to weekend port tours for local schools. I jotted each down, promising follow-up. For me, trust meant follow-through. That evening, I returned home with the satisfied ache of a day well spent. Marta greeted me in the kitchen as I set down my briefcase. I told her about the town hall and the apprentices' enthusiasm. She smiled, pride warm in her eyes. You've given them more than just a job, she said. You've given them a future. I nodded, thinking of Bennett stumbling through his own ventures, stripped of credibility and trust. He had sought power through titles and deception. I had built it through transparency and care. Before bed, I reviewed the latest audit report. No major safety violations, operational costs within budget, and lease revenues exceeding forecasts. These figures would form the backbone of my proposal when Everline's board reconvened to discuss expansion. But beyond the numbers, I reflected on the true measure of my success. The daily hum of activity, the shared laughter in the break room, and the steady flow of ships arriving on schedule. Power wasn't a trophy to brandish, it was a responsibility to honor. As I turned off the light, I thought of Leo and Amara, my godchildren, who had once wandered the docks wide-eyed and curious. Now, when they visited, they saw purpose and pride rather than fear. And that, more than any board vote or lease clause, was the legacy I would pass on. Because when you wield a different kind of power, one rooted in genuine trust and mutual respect, you don't merely shift an empire. You transform lives. I arranged a weekend visit to the docks with Leo and Amara, Bennett's children, transforming an otherwise ordinary Saturday into a lesson in heritage and resilience. The morning air was crisp, the sky an unbroken expanse of soft blue, and the harbor's usual symphony, honking horns, creaking cables, distant shouts, felt hushed beneath the promise of discovery. I met them at the fenced entrance to Dockyards 7 and 8, where the new Everline signage gleamed. Leo, at 7 years old, clutched his sister's hand. Amara, 5, hopped in place, eyes wide as she took in the rows of towering cranes. "Do you run all of this?" Leo asked, voice hushed with awe. I knelt to his level and brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "I just help keep it moving," I said. tapping the ground beneath my boot, a gesture they didn't fully grasp, but I knew the moment would settle in their memories. This land is where ships arrive, families earn paychecks, and communities thrive. I stood and offered my arm to Amara, and she looped her small hand through mine. We began with a walk along the quay edge, where container ships glided in and out like metal leviathans. I pointed out Jonah on the deck of a vessel, overseeing cargo transfers. "That's Jonah," I said. "He makes sure every box gets where it needs to go." Leo waved, and Jonah tipped his hard hat in return. Nearby, Sabrina guided her maintenance crew through a safety check on a crane's hydraulics. "Sabrina keeps us safe," I continued, fixing the machines and teaching apprentices how to do the same. Amara mimicked a crane movement with her arms, and Sabrina waved back, smiling. As we strolled past the loading ramps, I paused at a patch of concrete subtly marked with my company's emblem. I knelt and traced the logo with my finger. "This is mine," I told them quietly. Leo's brow furrowed. "You own the ground?" I nodded. "Owning the ground means no one can take it from you. It's your foundation." I looked out over the water, imagining the complex negotiations and careful planning that had secured this land under my holding company. Titles and leases are paper, but trust and teams keep everything running. We continued to the break area I had rebuilt, a bright, glass-walled space overlooking the harbor. Inside, crew members shared morning coffee and breakfast sandwiches. As we passed, they greeted us by name. "Good morning, Reed." "Hey, Leo, did you draw us a picture yet?" I introduced the kids, and they waved shyly. I felt a swelling of pride. This wasn't just an operation, it was a community. Outside the break room, I led them to a small, fenced garden I'd planted between Dockyard 7's office and the maintenance shed. Wildflowers, marigolds, daisies, and native grasses bloomed riotously, a splash of color against the steel expanse. "What's this for?" Amara wondered. I knelt beside her and plucked a marigold, to remind us that hard work and care can make something beautiful even in unexpected places. I handed her the flower. "Just like teams, when you help people grow, they make the whole place better." She beamed, tucking the bloom behind her ear. Heading back toward the entrance, we paused by a stack of shipping containers painted with murals of sea creatures and rope knots, an art project I'd commissioned with a local school. "Those were painted by kids from your neighborhood," I told Leo. "We wanted to connect the docks with the community." He ran a hand over a painted octopus tentacle. "It's cool," he said. The murals stood as symbols of partnership, the result of my belief that an operation as massive as this must also be rooted in human connection. At the gate, I knelt one more time before the kids. "Here's what matters. Titles can change, bosses can come and go, but when you own the land beneath an empire, you control its destiny." I stood and reached into my coat pocket, pulling out a small metal token stamped with the dock's coordinates. "I want you two to have this," I said, handing each a token. "Whenever you feel small in a big world, remember you're connected to something larger, where hard work, trust, and patience build legacies." They pressed the discs into their palms, wide-eyed. The sun leaned toward the horizon as we drove away, the harbor's crane silhouettes receding in the rearview mirror. In the quiet that followed, Leo turned to me. "Will you keep this land forever?" he asked. I glanced at him in the mirror, seeing both child and successor, the embodiment of what comes next. "As long as we remember what it stands for," I replied. Later that evening, I set the kids to bed in their own home, then returned to my study and placed my hands on the same maps and files I'd drawn up so long ago. I traced the lines of Dockyards 7 and 8, envisioning the shipping lanes, the crane rails, and the thriving workforce. Bennett had tried to uproot me, but he had overlooked one crucial fact. Power grounded in rightful ownership and genuine trust cannot be uprooted. I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the distant glow of the port lights. This empire rested on more than steel and cargo. It rested on foundation, the land beneath us and the community we built upon it. Occasionally, I reminded myself, it isn't the titles you hold that define your influence, but the ground you secure and the people you empower to walk upon it. And with that thought, I finally allowed myself to rest, confident that the legacy I'd forged would endure long after any title changed hands.